Okay, so I'm Marty Brophy, the current president of the CPA, Colorado Pilots Association. And I'd like to thank Mike Kosilniak for setting this up for us. He's the chair of our flight safety committee. So Mike, why don't you take the floor and introduce our speaker, and we can do whatever tests we need to. And I'm going to mute so I don't interfere.
Okay. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us. Tonight we have a very special guest, Chris Palmer, Chief CFI and founder of Angle of Attack. And you can see a lot of his stuff on YouTube. In 2006, Chris founded Angle of Attack, specializing in flight simulation training. More recently, he has worked on large-scale training projects for major manufacturers and airlines. His passion is in general aviation and seeing the success of each individual student. Today, he sees that success on a daily basis with students at Angle of Attack in Homer, Alaska, and through his online ground school and other educational resources on the internet. He has a wonderful supporting cast with his wife, Chelsea, and his two young boys, Apollo and River. He is an active flight instructor teaching students one-on-one, ranging from the beginner pilot all the way to CFI candidates. So I'm going to turn it over to Chris, and if you have any questions, write them down. And at the end of Chris's presentation, we'll open up the mics. I'm going to turn it over to Chris now. Welcome, Chris.
Yep. Thank you very much for the intro. If you could, as the host, allow me to share my screen, and we'll see if I can't get my presentation up here.
Okay.
There we go. Okay. And then once I get in here, if you will, just let me know if you guys see this working.
Excellent.
Yeah.
All right. Does that look good? You guys can see the graphic there?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. It would be nice if I could get everyone over on my side, but I'm just going to try to kind of look in the camera and go. So thanks for the brief intro. We're a couple hours behind you guys. And actually, I have a bit of a connection to Colorado. My sister lives in Denver. I used to live in Salt Lake City. That's where I did my first couple ratings as a 20-something-year-old. And actually, we had a bonanza that we'd fly into Metro Airport to get warranty work done. So I've been around Colorado a little bit, landed at many airports there, and have enjoyed your state, being a neighbor in Utah. So at 25, I moved to Alaska. Just kind of, I don't know. I just wanted the adventure of doing it. This is a float plane just by my office here. I had Alaska in my blood. I was born here, and I visited a couple times when I was 19 and 25, and finally decided to make the leap. You guys know how Denver Metro has grown. Salt Lake City grew much the same way. I grew up kind of a small town boy, and that was in my blood. So now I'm in small town Homer, Alaska. This is a view of where I live. If you're to look at the very base of this geographic feature here, it's called a spit. The airport is right there at the beginning of the water there. And that happens to be a volcano in the background. So Alaska's a little wild that way. Got a lot of adventure just in our back door. This is a glacier just a 5-minute flight away. Often something we see even when we're doing maneuvers for practice. This is by our practice area. I definitely take people here when I show them the area as well. This is at our airport. Captured the Northern Lights one time. It was mentioned that I have a supporting cast with my family. This is my son Apollo when he was 1 year old. He knows way too much about airplanes and is far too fascinated with them for his own good. And he's 4 now, but my 1 year old is much the same. I am very passionate about teaching. That is what I do. I love teaching. I do that, as was mentioned, through my online ground school, but it's great to see students go through just one-on-one. I always kind of have a celebratory check ride, completion jump. And that was with my student here, Sarah, who was from Wisconsin, that came up to do her commercial. And it's just a beautiful area to train. Obviously, we have our own particular challenges in training here in Alaska, just like you do in Colorado. I'm not dealing with density altitude anymore like I used to living in the Mountain West. In fact, the other day we had a negative 3,000 foot density altitude, if you can imagine, at our airport, which was pretty fascinating. But the people that I get to teach, that's really why I do what I do. And I'm very blessed to have many stories and many people I've been able to cross paths with and help get there. So in today's presentation, we're going to talk a little bit about some of my thoughts on learning to fly in the 21st century. There are some pros and cons to this, the 21st century, that is. Obviously, glass cockpits are a major feature of everything we do now in aviation. I would say they're definitely more prevalent maybe down in Colorado than they are here in Alaska, but we're still working that stuff in. In fact, this airplane behind me, our flight school airplane, I'm looking to get upgraded with some G5s, which kind of bring on the glass and a new GPS. Obviously, ForeFlight is very popular these days. And how do we work that in? Cameras in the cockpit. For anyone that has seen my my YouTube channel or Instagram, I post a lot of aviation media, really just kind of fly on the wall sort of stuff. People being able to see me teach students and be able to see some Alaska flying adventures. And the ever distracting cell phones in the cockpit, is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? This will be an interesting discussion, interesting Q&A at the end of the presentation here to see your thoughts as well. There's this really, really great quote that I love from Wilbur Wright, and he said, "It is possible to fly without motors, but not without knowledge and skill." And I constantly lean on this thought when I think of mixing the past and mixing the future, because really that's where we're at now. The future is here, but airplanes still fly like an airplane. The wing still flies just as it did back in the day. And so even with a 172, with a very nice G1000 cockpit, that wing is still going to fly much the same. You're getting the same characteristics. So how do we maintain the core skills and learn those core skills even in the 21st century? And that's a really interesting subject that I'm constantly trying to approach, because I am, to a certain extent, a millennial. I understand technology well, and I'm constantly trying to dig into the past and find those nuggets of information that I can pass on to my students that are still very valuable. So how are we mixing all this together? I see a little bit of gray hair here in our presentation. So this term stick and rudder will relate to a lot of you that have been flying for a long time. And the term comes from this book called Stick and Rudder, and it was written in the 30s. And if you haven't read it before, it's like the Bible of how to fly an airplane. Every time I pick it up and absorb another topic, I have to take a step back and think about what it's really saying, because it just has so much depth over time. So how do we mix those things with what we have today in our cockpit? How can we have stick and rudder skills while at the same time know how to operate an EFB with ForeFlight well, and know how to put the glass cockpit in its place as well? And I think we really do need to think about the difference between aviators and pilots. This is a big reason why in a lot of my branding, I use the term aviator, because I think there is a difference. I think an aviator brings all the tools to bear, rather than just being a pilot, which is in my case, like maybe an operator. It's someone that just operates things. Now, that's not to be disparaging on either one of those terms, because really I'm very proud to be a commercial pilot, whatever that term means, and carry that stuff forward. So glass cockpits, how can we use glass cockpits in today's world and have success doing so? So I mentioned that I used to fly a Bonanza. It was a G1000 Bonanza. Prior to that, we had a Bonanza that was simply a 1956 and had some rudimentary instruments, but would fly into Denver Metro quite a bit. And I was able to operate IFR with that airplane as a single pilot quite efficiently with the tools that I had. Of course, we know there's a high degree of automation with glass cockpits. They correct for many of the errors that we see in navigational equipment. And, we always have a very precise location about where we're at. it can almost become like a co-pilot, especially if you do have an autopilot. And of course, you're monitoring that. And then another advantage is preparing students for the airlines. So when I look at glass cockpits, I don't necessarily think that we should say that they are unsafe. I think that has been debunked at this point. I really enjoy a nice glass cockpit, just like the next guy. But one of the issues we're having these days is we have people that are simply becoming operators of avionics rather than focusing on the actual flying of the airplane. So you get a student in a brand new 172 with G1000, and there is a lot to learn about how to operate that system. But does that student know what adverse yaw is, what overbanking tendency is? Do they know what the left turning tendencies are and how to counteract for them? Can they land well in a crosswind? All of those stick and rudder skills that even in a 172 are important and can be taught in a 172, we need to think about, especially as educators and as even students, how do I get the most holistic education? So I'm the type of instructor that will cover up all the instruments for my students. I think to a certain extent, we get too reliant on automation, and we tend to stare at those screens quite a bit rather than keeping our eyes outside, which are telling us everything. I always tell my students that look out the window, that attitude is the absolute biggest instrument you have in VFR. And that is all still there in conjunction with the G1000 when you're flying. And of course, we have retrofits for all sorts of different packages these days. So I guess thinking about glass cockpits in general is they are a good thing. They can help, but we need to make sure that we don't let them get in the way of those basics of being an aviator. For flight EFB or really any AFB, but thinking about how that can be a positive here in the future or the present, I guess we're already here. For flight gives you assistance from pre-flight to shutdown. So whether you're looking at your weather and you're planning a couple days out and looking at all the imagery from the FAA, planning a flight, sending that flight as a flight plan to the FAA, activating that flight plan, navigating, down to the little features of when you land, it brings up the taxi chart for that airport and shows you your GPS location. So you have good situational awareness at your airport. All of these things just add to the need and really the necessity for something like ForeFlight. Because in today's world, what I think is interesting is a lot of pilots have become data managers. The FAA over the years has added more and more and more things that we need to know. The FAA through pilot training has added more things that we need to learn and keep within our purview. And it's simply become, in my opinion, too much. And to a certain extent, we need to learn where to compartmentalize that information and how to bring it up on demand when we need it. So ForeFlight's very good that way. If you're looking at the airport information, for example, you can bring up exactly what you need and have a look at it rather than sifting through an entire section of the chart supplement and trying to find the length of the runways and if there are lights here or, there's just so many details that maybe don't matter at the time, and you can kind of declutter that and look at what matters most to you in the moment and looking at that on-demand information. I think to that extent, that offers some workload reduction. The reason why I really, really enjoy this in bringing in technology in the cockpit is because really the ultimate thing I want to instill in my students is a sense of safety. So if they have more time to focus on the decision-making that goes into being that, quality aviator that I'm trying to help them become, then they can manage the other stuff on the side with something like ForeFlight and have a lot more brain power and stamina, really, even on longer flights, to focus on what matters. And that is inevitably that decision making. And really something like ForeFlight is just trying to help you with that decision making. I talked about that taxi diagram example of safety enhancements with ForeFlight. It does other things like tell you what runway you're lined up on when you pull up out on the runway. It has terrain awareness. You can get AHRS built into it and see traffic. There's all sorts of things that are positives with having and EFB. Cameras in the cockpit. This is an interesting subject. I think that it could be distracting if you let it. Typically cameras, they need to be set and forget sort of things. And you can't be the type of person that's going to show off for the cameras. At this point in my career, I do media all the time. And so I don't even know the cameras are there. Once I set everything up, if the camera is going to die, it's going to die. I'm focused on the flight at that point. And that's something that I think kind of gets rid of the cons for it. The pros for having cameras in the cockpit are self-evaluation. And even to this day, when I review videos that I do with students, I see so many things in myself as an instructor that I can improve and do better. And it allows us to self-evaluate and do things better the next time. So I get a lot more out of a lesson than simply what happens during the lesson, but I get to evaluate it after the fact and learn how I can do better the next time. And that goes for any license at any level, particularly for, say, a student pilot who gets to film their lessons, preferably with cockpit audio, and they get to relive that lesson without the stress of being in the lesson and get much more value out of that particular lesson. Students that have cameras in the cockpit typically do much better than those that don't. So their retention is through the roof. There is something to be said for simply sharing aviation as well. There are a lot of eyes on the internet these days and a lot of different ways that entertainment can go. But looking at the future generation of pilots, we do need to be good stewards of what we have and what we love in aviation, that passion we have, and be willing to share that. And that's a big thing, what I do here at Angle of Attack through YouTube and through Instagram and other sources. And it does make a difference for people. And really my perspective is we all came from a certain mold. Not many of us were given the ability to fly, right? We had to work for it. We had to earn it. I'm sure there are some people here that went through the military to earn it, which is in and of itself a very difficult task. So it's very helpful for those of us that are several steps ahead to be able to share it for those others that are going through that same thing. So phones in the cockpit. This is an interesting topic. I'll just share really briefly. All the tools of ForeFlight are typically available on the phone now. So this brings to bear that redundancy that everyone talks about when they talk about an iPad dying and losing that. Well, you've got your phone as well. So really, you've got all your information right there. It's that on-the-go management that we talked about before, that data management. We hear about lost comms a lot, especially in instrument training. Well, if you have a cell phone, it's possible to actually call air traffic control through the Bluetooth of your headset and communicate with them and get a clearance. So it's just like this really odd way of thinking about that technology in the cockpit, but it can actually help in the grand scheme of things. Not that that's a common thing to lose comms anyway. One thing that I use quite a bit here in Alaska is device tracking. So something like an inReach from Garmin. The one I use is a Track Plus, and it's made for aviation. It has my tail number attached to it. The FAA and Flight Service is now able to attach those devices to your particular aircraft number. So search and rescue is a much more streamlined process in case something were to go wrong. And of course, you guys have plenty of terrain in Colorado that this would be very valuable for, because really my perspective is, if I have to survive in the wilderness, it doesn't matter how much equipment I have. I only have so much time. But if I can reduce the time to search and rescue finding me, then I have a much better chance of survival. And the 21st century is also, I would say, our biggest advantage these days is how much aviation media and really knowledge is available at our fingertips. So things like aviation podcasts. I have one myself that I've had since 2014. It's called Aviator Cast. There are many great podcasts out there for aviation that can really help mentor people through the process and get some different perspectives, even on different careers. Aviation YouTube, for the most part, is a very positive place to get information and encouragement. I know that through the comments on my channel, I get a lot of people that are simply encouraged to see the process. one thing about my channel that seems to be a recurring theme is that people appreciate that I'm just kind of a normal person. I have a family. I've worked hard to get where I am, and it makes it seem like this aviation thing is doable for them. So that is a great place for students and prospective pilots to go as well. And it's just an inspiring place to be. And of course, we know that that just by virtue of the internet, the information superhighway, whatever you want to call it, pretty much anything you need to know is right at your fingertips. I know that for some of the deeper things with instruction, maybe it's regulations and how they're interpreted, or you know, similar things. The internet is a fantastic tool to find that information and get to the bottom of it. And so as a student gets a student, or even a pilot that's becoming more proficient in their career, they can get more and more and more information, and good information, from the internet, and just you know, take advantage of that in a way that even when I got my private license in 2003, I wasn't able to do. Another piece of technology here that I didn't even mention, which just kind of comes to mind, is flight simulators. You know, flight simulators are incredibly helpful. I did have them growing up, and just felt like it really lent to a big head start when I started my training. And of course, simulation has only become better, especially when you consider instrument simulation and how much that helps stay proficient for IFR. So with limited time here, that's all I have. I think that opens plenty of questions that you guys may have about how I perceive maybe the 21st century in those particular topics. I'm happy to take any questions as well on flying in Alaska and what it's like here, and maybe what I found different even from the Mountain West when I moved here. And I'm happy to talk about those things as well as we talk about Q&A. So that is it.
Oh, heck, well, I'll just kick it off.
All right.
Hey, Chris, I came to your site through Josh when you guys did the Alaska series. And actually I met Josh at Oshkosh back in 2018, and they were camped just across the road from where we were parked. So it was kind of fun bumping him every couple of days. But the Alaska series that you guys did was just amazing. I frequently recommend that as just I mean, that could easily be published on any cable channel at any point in time with no editing whatsoever. The thing that I thought was really funny was, where did your clear prop bellow come from? And the fact that your son has picked that up is just adorable.
Yeah, it's pretty good. So what he's referring to is at the very beginning of a flight now, when we're about to start up, I came up with this blood curdling scream for the clear prop that has kind of become popular. And really, you know, in like an actual safety sense, the clear prop thing is actually important. There are plenty of people who have been hit by a prop, but it's become kind of this joke. Like people barely whisper out the window to say clear. First of all, it's not achieving what we need it to achieve. And so my thought was, hey, like, we need to do this. Let's do it with style, and let's do it the proper way. And let's just do it really loud to get people's attention. So I started doing that. It became funny. You know how kids are. My son picked up on it. And then of course with Josh, he didn't see it coming, and I pulled it out on him.
Yeah, it was pretty epic. And just your son's very adorable in the flight that you just recently posted.
Yeah, he did it in the middle of the flight while we were en route.
Yeah.
It kind of got quiet for a few minutes, and he just let it loose and just scared the crap out of me.
I had a comment or question myself about autopilots. I mean, part of the difficulties with the 737 MAX is that the pilots didn't understand what their autopilots were doing. And I mean, I kind of got the concept that if you're ever thinking, what is the autopilot doing? The next thought to come into your head should be turn off the autopilot. And what do you think about the possibility of people getting too dependent on Garmin's and autopilots, you know, especially in commercial you know, aviation for airlines, but even in small planes, you know?
Yeah, it is an interesting concept. Even the airlines started having a lot of issues about 10 years ago because their SOPs would require them to turn on the autopilot basically right after takeoff at 400 feet. And a lot of the pilots were losing their skills. And so kind of starting with some of the American airlines, Delta being one of them that I worked with, they actually started to allow for their pilots to hand fly the airplanes up to 20,000 feet. Now, what a lot of people don't know about autopilots is the autopilot doesn't just kind of do its own thing. The autopilot follows what's called a flight director. So those pilots can hand fly that airplane in a very efficient and smooth way, just as the autopilot would by following certain cues on their avionics. And we can do the same things these days with our Garmin avionics. So instead of actually engaging the autopilot to fly that flight director path, the pilot himself or herself can fly it just as the autopilot would. And when I was flying the Bonanza quite a bit, doing single pilot IFR, I found that was very helpful in maintaining my skills. And of course, above and beyond that, just proper training. I think there's something to be said even for the 737 MAX that the training involved is very important. And I had the opportunity to actually go through a flight safety course with that Bonanza, did a lot of the procedures and training that you would do for, say, a King Air, but I did it for Bonanza. So I had that advantage. And I think we need to look at it in that way. As instructors and as students, I think we need to be really careful about starting at that glass cockpit level. And again, talking about the stick and rudder skills, the other skills that make a good aviator, making sure that starting with automation from the very beginning, that doesn't leave us behind in the ways that will serve us regardless of the type of airplane we fly, whether it's a J3 Cub or a 737. So that's kind of my quick perspective on it.
Chris, this is Mike Kasalniak. A question I have is, when you have a brand new student, and this is pretty much what you were just talking about, do you begin with paper charts and a ruler?
I'm going to assume that you're talking about flight planning. So not necessarily a brand new student, but the first time we go on the flight planning. And yes, I do. So I don't just dive right into for-flight EFB. I do want them that when they take their check ride, I want them to use for-flight. When they leave the check ride, I want them to use for-flight because that is what is going to be practical for them in the real world. But when we first do our cross-country flights, I want them to do it by hand, figure everything out, and go through all the dead reckoning that you're supposed to do there. And then we can even go through an exercise of comparing that to for-flight and what it takes. I kind of use the analogy of film versus digital cameras. I grew up using a film camera, and a lot of the terms that are used for film cameras, like ISO and shutter speed and aperture, are all used for digital now. And it's the same way with flight planning. All of those same terms are used, and for the student pilot to know where those terms came from and what they mean and what for-flight is doing behind the scenes when we plan a flight is really powerful for them to understand where it's coming from and really the power of the tools and what it's helping them with. So yes,
Okay.
I definitely start out that way.
Okay. And then you mentioned phones in the cockpit. And I caught a little bit of what you said about that. You can connect your phone via, I wrote it down, Bluetooth, if it's an emergency, and make a call that way.
Yeah. So if and I can't really show it to you here, but if you have for-flight, they will have phone numbers for air traffic control at certain airports. And so those, you'll be able to, like flight service, for example. So say you're in an emergency, you needed to contact someone, you could call flight service and get the phone number for the tower, say you're trying to contact. You can talk on your Bluetooth Bose headset, for example, and if you have cell coverage, you could call that tower and get that clearance. It's going to give everyone warm fuzzies if you do that and you have that capability, rather than just, flying IFR in the blind and them having to get everyone out of the way because you squawk lost comms.
Oh, okay. And you mentioned the inReach. Do you carry any other survival equipment in the plane besides the inReach?
We do. Yeah, we carry we carry food and water and shelter and all sorts of things. This time of year, you got to carry sleeping bags as well. Kind of a fun fact, in Alaska, it's actually the law. You have to carry certain things in your airplane. It's in the chart supplement. Not a lot of people know about it. I take a little bit of creative liberty with that because it tells you to carry wool blankets and all sorts of old things. So I've taken some creative liberty to do things that are a little bit more modern and prove to be lighter and more warm, for example. So yeah, we fly over a lot of remote terrain here, and just right outside of town, it definitely opens your eyes. That's something that was definitely different going from Utah, Colorado, the West area coming here is you're alone very, very fast.
Oh, boy.
Don't you also have to carry a weapon, like a gun to fend off bears or something?
Yeah, see, that's one thing I don't carry. Not that I'm against it or anything, but I don't carry a gun on the airplane. It does say that you're supposed to.
Oh.
Hey,
Chris,
Chris,
can you
how you
talk?
doing? Sorry if I'm interrupting. Anybody here? I apologize. Hey, yeah, I fly in Denver, and I just took my 5-year-old up today for the first time, and I actually did. I knew you had kids, but I forgot how old they were. So I took up Adam today, and he had a great time. I'm just wondering maybe two things you can recommend you do with children so they're having fun and not getting too scared and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think anything with my children, the fear really rubs off on them if I have it. So spiders are an example. My boys, I've tried to teach them not to be afraid of spiders. Why do we even need to be afraid of spiders? So I more make it a curiosity thing about spiders. And I think it's the same thing with aviation. You'll see in my videos, there's a recent one where we went on a flight. My boy was in the left seat, and I just make it a cool thing. Wow, we're flying. Look at that. And then inviting him to touch the control column every now and again. He loves to look out the window. In fact, he had a meltdown with his mom a couple weeks ago. We went and landed on this frozen lake, and I told him that he was going to have to ride in the back, and he was very upset because he wanted to be in the captain's seat. And I don't know. I just think anything you do to help is a lot of fun. Talking about airplanes and having airplane models at home and talking about the different control surfaces and all those things and how they fly is also a fun thing. You know how little kids are. Apollo's 4. He wants me to watch him land an airplane, a model airplane, and he comes in and just smashes that thing. But I've told him and taught him how to kiss the asphalt. So now he watches very carefully as he touches that thing down perfectly on the ground. So all those little things are just fun for him. I would just say have a lot of fun with it, and it'll
Yeah,
rub
that's
off on him.
I appreciate that, Chris. Yeah, he's turning 5 soon, and I'm afraid to put him in the front seat yet. He's the button pusher, right? So,
Right.
I guess slide him back in the track a little bit and go for it, I suppose.
Yeah, my son can't even reach, so I have a little booster for him, and he can barely reach the control column. The control wheel. So
Yeah.
it's up to you. You got to make those safety calls too and make sure everything's good there. But I think if they're taught to be respectful of the airplane, then they will be.
I appreciate that, Chris. Thanks. I'll
Yeah.
sign off. Thanks for coming out, man. That's
Absolutely.
we all love it. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Aaron.
Chris, can you talk about that tracking, that GPS tracking, I guess, from Garmin, and that was in the ForeFlight products, or where'd that come from?
Yeah, so that's separate. So I consider that to be kind of a search and rescue thing if something were to go wrong. So I have, again, what's called a Track Plus. It's called a Rock Air. It's specifically made for aviation. You can tie it into your electrical system. So when you fire up the master or the radios, it'll turn it on. It'll start tracking. The reason why I like this one is because it is aviation specific, tied to my tail number, and the updates are much more frequent than Garmin. A big company like Garmin, where the inReach is used for not only aviation or whatever you want, but it's used for hunting, hiking, fishing. They have a pretty high dollar amount that they're charging for that. So it's kind of up to the pilot in terms of the specific package that they buy and how often that updates. My perspective is we travel pretty quickly in a 3-minute period to get, one dot of tracking and then the next dot of tracking. I figure the tighter we can get those increments down, the safer it is. You have family that have them. If you get stranded somewhere, you can text message them with your phone. So it Bluetooths to your phone. You can message people, say, hey, I got stuck for the night out of weather and I'll be here. I'm fine. Or say that there's like a middle of the road thing where it's not quite an emergency, but you say you blew a tire on takeoff in a remote place and you have buddies you could text to come out and help you. There's that sort of thing. Or if you get in a lot of trouble, there is a panic switch or an SOS switch that will alert pretty much everyone. It's going to get a lot of attention.
And the name of the product again?
So Track Plus, TRACPULPLUS, excuse me, or Garmin InReach.
Okay.
Chris, what about the spot trackers? Do you find those to be deficient in some way? We have one of those, and we haven't had to use it really, but we put it on when we're doing cross countries.
So the spot tracker is just fine. The reason why I can't use one up here in Alaska is they work on a different constellation of satellites. The InReach and the Track Plus work off of Iridium, which has wider coverage, whereas the spot trackers typically work closer to the equator. But in Colorado, you shouldn't have an issue. There is kind of a line of sight issue with the spot trackers. With mountains, I'm just thinking mountains. Because it's kind of looking toward the equator when it's looking for a satellite. So if you're behind a certain certain height of mountain or something, then that can become an issue. But I would think in Colorado, you're probably pretty well off with them.
You say the Iridium is a better system.
It is. It's more widespread and it moves toward the north more. So it was initially made to replace cell phones or really be the cell phone network until they created that. And then now they're trying to find other ways to use the satellites that are up there, but it works really well up here in Alaska.
It's like 88 satellites, isn't it? Isn't that the atomic number of Iridium? And so that's why they named it.
Yeah, interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Hey, Chris, regarding new students coming to you, online ground school versus traditional in-person ground school, are you noticing any positive or negative trends one way or the other as they come to you?
Life is really busy for everyone, it seems. It just keeps getting busier. And the great thing about having an online ground school is it's kind of learn at your own pace and when you can. So if someone works a job and can't really get to ground school until 10 p.m. at night, they have the opportunity to do something like that. So I actually find that it opens up that training opportunity to a lot more people. I do think there is value in in-person ground schools. If you can do it, they're just becoming a much more rare. With my ground school, I've really tried to make it a little bit more grassroots, kind of like what we're experiencing here, where it's not just about passing the written test, but it's a lot about safety issues and how all of that is intertwined. And so when someone actually does hit flight school, they're already gears turning to become a safe pilot. So, I think I would say that not all ground schools are created equal, but there are some good ground schools out there online that you're getting just as much value out of as you would an in-person ground school.
Chris,
Chris,
I was going to say, so in the vein of the theme of the presentation with the future of aviation or technology within aviation, I guess, and knowing that, the FAA is very slow to change. I'm certainly a very strong proponent of learning the fundamentals, much like you talked about the paper chart for cross-country flying and things like that, steam gauges before glass. But one of my constant frustrations is the necessity of learning and maintaining the old methods, such as here's the abbreviations for all the weather aviation information and all the legacy things that are required as part of training going forward. What are your thoughts around what could be done better from teaching new people the new ways, but at the same time, you know, the understanding of where we've been. I
Yeah.
guess I'm not sure I'm phrasing the question quite right, but I think you understand where I'm coming from.
Yeah, I think I understand the spirit of it. And I think, let me say this controversial statement. Everything the FAA wants you to learn is not the most important thing that you need to learn. We don't have to learn everything absolutely perfectly that is on the written test or that is in the manual. We need to learn the things that are the most important to keep us safe. And of course, there are a bunch of tertiary details that are important to know exactly what you're doing. But you bring up a really good example with weather. You know, why do I need to know that an AirMet Tango is for turbulence or an AirMet Zulu is for ice? What good is that actually doing me in the grand scheme of things? Whereas now we have these iPads that can not only on the fly show us where that is, but they're constantly updating, just in case something changed between the time we pre-flighted and when we go out to our airplane. And the thing I definitely point out to my students as we go through this exercise of comparing the old versus the new is how quickly conditions change as a pilot, and being able to have that information on the fly to make safe decisions, which is the ultimate goal, to make safe decisions. And how if you've done a long paper flight plan that just gets thrown out the window the second something goes different, that doesn't really help you. So again, it goes back to that idea of data management and what really matters and when, and allowing ourselves, rather than memorizing all those little tiny details, which is admirable, that the most admirable thing is to have a constant thumb on that safety switch that says, hey, I'm going to make the safe decision right now and get the information I need right now in order to do that. And I think that's where ForeFlight or, any flight bag shines, is it shows us, hey, this is what you need now. Now you need to make a decision. Now you'll go on to the next step. Because, as I flew a lot and fly a lot as a commercial pilot, things move very quickly, and you've got to be able to get through that information quickly while making safe decisions. So it's somewhere in between. Again, I admire that there is that initial learning, but there is a point of diminishing returns where you need to say, hey, I need the information when it matters, and have the tools like an electronic flight bag to do that.
Yet the electronic flight bags can lag by quite a bit. I mean, even the AWOS you get flying into an untowered airport, it can be 50 minutes old. And if you're out and you're relying on ForeFlight to tell you where to land or which runway to pick, or
yep,
it's still more current than the weather that you checked when you took off.
Right, and that's my point. It's not perfect, and we can't ever rely on a piece of technology as if it's perfect, right? Like, the best instrument we have are our eyes to look out the window and see what we see, regardless of what the forecast has said. So I just think that, that's a very good example. I do not use the METAR function on ForeFlight to determine what runway I'm going to use. Instead, I use the little ASOS thing that pops up on my map when I'm so many miles out that says tune this frequency, and I listen to the current weather. And so there are, a handful of examples, many examples of this, what's better, the real world or the flight bag one. And what I always try to do with my students is pull them back and make them realize where this came from, that, hey, reading a sectional chart is exactly the same reading it on ForeFlight as it is reading an actual paper chart. You might get some enhancements. You can still get the METARs and read those. All those things are still helpful. It's just a matter of what you get and when.
Chris, what are the best months to fly in Alaska?
Definitely summertime, long days. So anywhere between May and September, I would say. June, July, August are the best. Obviously around solstice. To fly at midnight and have plenty of light outside is definitely a different experience.
Wow, that's amazing.
Hey, Chris, I've got a question about flight simulation.
Okay.
So over the last year and a half, I've spent a fair amount of time and a ton of money getting a pretty rock solid simulator set up well, I don't even call it my spare bedroom anymore. I call it my simulator room, but happens to have a bed in it. And I mean, I use Pilot Edge. I do. I'm looking for recommendations on how you build more of a structured process of using the simulator, other than just, cranking out a half-hour flight, an IFR flight from, a class Delta to a class Delta and then turning it off. Do you have any recommendations on like building proficiency, like in a more structured lesson plan format?
Yeah, there are a couple good books out there. One of them I can think of, the title may not be exactly perfect, but it's called Teaching in the Clouds. They're from ASA, which is a publisher.
Yeah.
And the guy that writes them is Bruce. His last name eludes me, but first name Bruce. He's out of Seattle, and he really knows his stuff when it comes to instruments. But he also goes through how to use a simulator to build your instrument proficiency. And kind of the way I've been going with this is I have a simulator here too. Is I don't know everything. I haven't done every approach, and those things that I haven't done or haven't seen before, those are the sorts of things that I'm really curious to practice. And I'm curious to practice those on the days where the weather's just awful. So when I can load in the real world weather that I see outside and practice that as if I was flying in it, I think that sort of curiosity or that sort of setup seems really attractive to me right now. With Pilot Edge, it becomes a little bit difficult because their coverage isn't total. You're not necessarily going to be able to fly in Colorado and get that coverage. But honestly, any work you're doing to remain proficient with IFR is a lot more than many pilots are doing, especially taking that simulation and applying it to the real world. So I would just say, keep it up, but stay curious and try to do the things that you're not comfortable with in a safe environment like a simulator.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Thanks.
Okay, Chris, how's it going, buddy?
Hey, man.
Good seeing you.
Yeah,
I've
friend.
I've known Chris for about 15 years or so. So thanks, Colorado Pilots Association, for having him. I think this is cool. But I kind of had a tag on question. First, I want to say I love the new studio hangar office. That's pretty cool. Love having the airplane in the background. The second part is how, I mean, I guess like I said, to tag onto that question was just asked. I mean, do you have students who come in who are like, hey, I know the GTN 750 because I've used the iPad app, or I know the 430 like the back of my hand because I've used, my flight simulator. And if that happens, I mean, one, does that happen? And two, do you even, maybe if someone's not as proficient, recommend, hey, maybe you should pick up this, whatever the add-on is and go from there?
Yeah, there's all sorts of different things you can do these days. Like you said, iPad emulators for different avionics sets you're getting. There's a company called Real Sim Gear that seems to have created every single GPS available out there. And so you can actually get hands-on with these simulators now. And really, for me, it ends up becoming that muscle memory of how many clicks and where and how do my hands move around the menu system more than anything. Seems to be the biggest thing when it comes to proficiency with GPSs specifically. So they even have G5s, the navigational equipment you can get now. So it's pretty complex what you can get these days. But I don't, this airplane is an instrument yet. I still need I'm going to get it updated this winter, hopefully fly it down south and get it updated. So I haven't had a lot of IFR students in this particular plane. So, it's tricky because for me, I just come back to anything in aviation that we're not familiar with. We need to identify that and then kind of attack it. And so, Trevor knows me from way back when I was a fairly proficient instrument pilot in a G1000 Bonanza, but I didn't know anything about stick and rudder flying until I moved to Alaska and really started to attack that area of what I didn't know. Got my tailwheel endorsement, got my commercial seaplane rating. And I'm really fascinated currently about just how a regular airplane flies with a wing, and why do floats add so much complexity to the whole process, and why is a tailwheel with big tires such a such a you know, an easy plane to fly in some cases, but a difficult plane to fly in others. So I think there are all these different parts of aviation. Avionics is one of them that we need to dive into, and some of these sources here that I talked about where we can learn about those is incredible these days with YouTube, podcasts, books, blogs, everything. You can learn anything you want to learn almost for free these days in aviation. So I would just say keep attacking it that way.
So to follow up to that though, I mean, do you have people who come in or they're like, I already know this, I don't need to waste my time on whatever it may be? I mean, how do you combat students that kind of come in with that sort of attitude? And I'm sure you humble them.
Yeah. So that's an interesting way of phrasing it, because we know the 5 hazardous attitudes, right? But I learned of the 6th as an instructor that I've identified, and that is know it all. And I definitely think that's a hazardous attitude. None of us know it all, and we always need to be humble and continue to learn in aviation. Thankfully, I haven't flown with many people that are that way. Typically, the people that come to me are very ready to learn and excited to learn something new. And I think most pilots are that way. Most pilots want to learn something new. So yeah, just you guys can adopt that if you want to. Know it all is a hazardous attitude.
Cool. Thanks, Chris. We'll talk soon.
You bet.
Any other questions for Chris?
Yeah, this is Gary Toby. You mentioned search and rescue a couple of times. Is Alaska seeing a great reduction in the number of search and rescue because of, well, all those things you've talked about? But historically, Alaska's had the most. I've been in Civil Air Patrol for years, and Alaska's always been the leader. Are you doing a lot better now?
They still are the leader. I would say that there are probably a lot more things that are happening now that are of a non-emergency situation. So for example, I was flying with a friend and he got a message that his other friend accidentally crashed his Cub at his cabin strip. And so we had to go and rescue him, which was an interesting experience. But instead of having to engage search and rescue in a situation like that, he could call his friend with a bush plane and have him come pick him up. So I think there are a lot of situations like that that are hard to quantify. But you know, just as another example, I know someone with a spot tracker that had their boat sink in a fairly remote location here, and the search and rescue saved their life. The Coast Guard showed up in snowy conditions, you know, very low visibility, just minutes before the boat went completely under in icy waters. So we have a search and rescue coordination center here in Alaska that all the agencies work together really well. So if something starts to happen, kind of everyone's engaged, and we're lucky enough to have the Coast Guard really nearby, but also military and everything else. I don't think we give those guys enough credit until the you know what hits the fan, and then they're our angels.
Yeah, of course, the Coast Guard is kind of crazy anyway. They fly, I think they have 100 feet and half a mile all the time in their helicopters.
Yeah, and it's needed. I mean, that makes a big difference here, because sometimes that's the standard weather.
And you just mentioned as soon as you take off, you're over a mountain going inland. We have some of that problem. Do you have cell phones on the backside of some of that?
So not really, but the good thing about some of these trackers is you can use that cell phone device and text message people with your current cell phone. You don't necessarily have to have your cell phone. Some of them have a keypad that you can enter in. But if I land somewhere remote and my wife wants me to check in, which is common, I can send her a message and say I'm okay. It ends up being very, very helpful. Or, you know, even if you're going to be late, it's helpful for people to know you're going to be late. I had my father-in-law was 3 days overdue on a fishing trip, and we didn't know where he was, and he's not the type to get one of these devices. And we actually went out and found him in a float plane, or we were in a float plane and went out and found him nestled in this little bay underneath this volcano. So those things are helpful too, because we were making calls and making sure everything was okay, but they were making their own safe decision to stay put. So you know, that's just one thing living in Alaska that we deal with a lot more is even right outside of town. It's very, very remote, even if it's just trees. And I want to be found as quickly as possible with those tools. And I still use traditional tools like a flight plan, flight following if I can. You know, I try to use the traditional tools and have triple or quadruple redundancy for people to know where I'm at.
Good idea. Thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions for Chris? Okay. All right. Well, Chris, I really want to thank you very much on behalf of the Colorado Pilots Association for doing this seminar with us tonight. It's really great. And please thank Krista Willis. She's amazing.
Yeah, my assistant.
Yeah, she did real good.
Yeah, I will second Michael's thanks, Chris. And if any of us get up to Homer, maybe we can find you and learn how to fly on skis.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, if you are in the area, even as simple as going up and seeing the glaciers, you know, it just becomes kind of another training flight. So don't hesitate to reach out if that's something that you guys want to do. Flying in Alaska is very fun, even if just for an hour. So
Yes, I want to do that.
I just want to say, Chris, your content on the internet is spectacular. I've been following you for quite a bit. The videos and the podcast, if you guys haven't checked it out, man, it's real. And I'm not just sucking up. It really is. It really is good stuff. Yeah, it's really
thank you. I
impressive.
appreciate that.
It's really.
Yeah, I watched the one with you and your son. I watch you during lunchtime in my office when I'm eating my lunch, and as soon as I got home, I turned it on for my wife, and I said, "You gotta see this." It was amazing. It was great. It was
Yeah.
When we sent out the email to the organization that you were speaking, I went out and grabbed that particular video and included it into the email. So
perfect.
It's, you know, you just hit all the right notes of just how much aviation is a family event, and it opens up so many doors that just are so unique.
Yeah. That video definitely embodies a lot of what life is like for us right now. Maybe didn't share enough of the crazy moments, but yeah, we're very blessed to get to do all that. And
your Thanksgiving YouTube did.
What's that?
Your Thanksgiving YouTube.
Oh yes.
That you shared with everybody about the family. That was great.
Yep. Appreciate it, guys.
Cool. Well, that'll wind up our meeting. Chris, another nice thing you did for the board of directors anyway is we replaced our probably mostly boring board of directors meeting with a nice one. So it's kind of a holiday gift to the membership. So I hope everybody enjoyed it. And
you're welcome.
So you'll be back next month, right?
Yeah.
So you'll be back next month, right?
Yeah. Save you guys from the pain.
We only get to skip once a year, Brian, so you'll have to put through it next January.
All right.
All right. Thanks a lot, Chris, and thanks everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Take care, guys.
Clear.
Clear prop.
See you, buddy. Take care.
Bye.
And it looks like everybody's leaving. Thanks a lot, Mike, for setting this up.
You're welcome.
All right, we'll talk to you in January and have a good holiday.
All right, you too and everybody else. Have a happy holiday.
Bye.
Bye-bye.